Welcome to the Soul Grit Podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. Hi, welcome back to the Soul Grit Podcast. This is Anne, and I'm all by myself today. It's a solo episode, and if you've picked up on my personality over these episodes, you can probably guess that these aren't my favorite to do. I would rather be talking to one of our very interesting guests, but once in a while there comes some kind of issue that I feel like I need to talk about, and I wanted to share that with you today. I have noticed in my years as a therapist that sometimes the issues that clients are dealing with, even like really intimate, personal themes that happen in their life, sometimes they can come in waves where I will see more than one client presenting with the same kind of theme in their session. And when that happens, it usually catches my attention, and that will tell me either, oh, maybe I need to read a book about this, or maybe I need to get some training on this, or maybe I need to pay attention because God wants to do something in my life or in my heart with this particular topic. And so I always pay attention to those things. And what I've noticed lately, which you are not going to be surprised at all if you live in the United States, is that there is a lot of political anxiety going on because we are in an election season. So I'm recording this right at the beginning of October. That means we only have about 5 weeks until Election Day. So things are heating up. Our street corners are plastered with signs for congressmen and city council and all of the different things. There are flags flying for presidential candidates. Anytime I'm going for a walk and I see somebody's garage door open, I tend to see their political flags in their garage as well. I don't know. That's a thing now, I guess. You see people wearing hats. You see lots and lots of content on social media addressing people's political opinions and beliefs. And so what I've been noticing in sessions is that I've had several people come in with quite a bit of anxiety around the elections. And this actually kind of has its own certain chemistry with me as the therapist, because I have my own anxieties about what's going on, managing them for myself, and then also being able to handle it for people who are in session with me, especially if I have different beliefs than the clients who are coming in. So I wanted to just figure out what I could figure out about this for my own benefit, for my family, and also for those clients who are coming in feeling very vulnerable in this season. So I thought I would talk about, why are people so afraid? And if you have strong political beliefs, you might already know why people are afraid because you feel afraid yourself. And I don't really want to get into specifics of our current race and our current candidates and their policies, because I want this to be able to apply in other countries and as well as other years, election years. But what I have noticed is that people have this feeling that if the wrong candidate wins, then their way of life is going to change. And I've noticed this specifically about the economy. For a lot of people, I've heard that if this candidate doesn't win, then I'm going to have to leave the state. Of course, I'm living in California, and so you can understand some of the political climate that's here. I've heard people think that they're going to have to move, that they won't be able to afford to retire, that their jobs will be taken by immigrants or illegals crossing the border. Again, I'm in Southern California, so this is very applicable. I've heard people be afraid that they will lose rights, reproductive rights, transgender rights, marriage rights, school choice rights, gun rights, like you name it. There is something to be afraid of. That's what the climate is right now. And the more that we watch the news and consume media, the more afraid we feel, because there's a reality here that the more scared you are, the more activated you're going to be, and the more adamant that you're going to be, the more opinionated, and the more likely to vote and try to get your candidate voted in. And so there's an incentive for those working on the election to be able to stoke your fear. But I just did a little research. Here are some of the reasons why people feel particularly anxious during an election season. I just want you to think about whether one of these has anything to do with how you're feeling right now. So the first is, as you can imagine, divisive politics. I feel like every 4 years we're gearing up for an election, and we kind of, after the election, we kind of deal with the consequences. We go on for 2 or 3 years and we figure out how to deal with it. And then when that 4th year comes along, we start heating up again, and it points out where our divides are. So even if we've been getting along great with family and friends and church members for this whole about 3-year period, once it comes to election time, we notice where the ideological divides are, meaning I didn't know you thought that way about immigration, or I didn't know you thought that way about the economy. And now we see where there is a divide. Another one of the reasons that makes people so afraid right now is that this feels like very high stakes. And you will hear different broadcasters talk about how this is the most important election of your lifetime. And let me just remind you that they say that every time, and they have said that in the past, and you're still here. So even though this feels like very high stakes, I think you need to resist believing that this particular election is higher stakes than previous elections. Now, there may be something that directly impacts you in this. For example, some kind of economic policy, or let's say you have family members who are trying to immigrate, or you have a particular interest in school choice, something like that. This may feel like high stakes. That will create a sense of urgency. Another big problem that we've been having in our country, and I'm sure in other countries as well, is just that there's a prevalence of misinformation. So the news is very sensationalized. It leads to confusion and fear, and it's very hard for us to discern fact from fiction. One of the problems is that we tend to have our favorite news sources, and we're not able to really listen to different facts that may come from a different source because we don't trust that source for whatever reason. And so that leaves us vulnerable to having misinformation because of the just that bias or the narrowness of where we get our information from. Another one is social media influence, and I have to say I am probably more in tune with what's going on because of social media than I used to be before social media was a thing. Yes, I'm old enough to remember that. And so now we get everybody's opinions and emotions, and really a chance for all of those anxieties to really be amplified. Some of us really do have a fear of change. The prospect of new policies and leadership makes us feel fearful because we don't know what it will be like when those things change, if the laws change, if things that used to be allowed are no longer allowed, and vice versa. And that leads people to having a loss of control. So people may feel in this climate that their one vote may not make very much of a difference. And I know that's the reason why we try to wear the sticker and post on the social media that we voted and do all of the things to encourage voting, because we know that having more votes in a certain direction makes more of an impact, but it can still feel like if I didn't get out to vote or if I forgot to send in my ballot, it wouldn't make that much difference on the climate. And so what's the point of me doing it anyway? And then lastly, just your personal identity, that for a lot of us, our politics have become intertwined with our personal identity, which creates these emotional responses that are just a lot more focused in this area. So now when we're discussing politics, it feels much more triggering. I hate to use that word outside of like talking about trauma, but it does feel like it's provoking some kind of anxiety, fear, or anger when we talk about these things. And I've definitely noticed this. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I grew up in a conservative Christian household that was just Republican. I didn't know there was a different way to be. And I can remember feeling all the way through high school, college, young adulthood, up through my 30s, really feeling like anytime somebody talked about politics, it was like somebody turned the static on in my brain. Like literally there was a buzz in my brain and I could not follow the conversation and I couldn't care less about it. And it wasn't until recent years now that I've hit my 40s that I've started to care about it. And that feels very different to me. But what I have noticed is that because some of my ideas have changed, I now feel more anxious about some of the conversations that I have to have. I can remember the very first election that I was old enough to vote in was in 2000, and I was at Stanford living in my freshman dorm, and I can remember one of my dorm mates coming out crying when he heard the news that George W. Bush had won the election, and he couldn't bear the thought of that happening. And I remember looking at him and thinking, that is so weird. Like, why would you, as an 18-year-old or 19-year-old, get so worked up about a presidential election? Like, it didn't matter to me at all. And I thought it was cool that I got to vote, but the outcome of it, I didn't understand any of the significance. And so it went on kind of like that until recent years, where now I do care more about those things, but I think I care the most in that I don't want people to get so hung up on politics. I want it to matter, but I want them to remember it, particularly if you're a person of faith and you have faith in Jesus Christ. I want you to remember that he is the king and that he is in control. And so I want to shift gears now that we've talked about a little bit about what the problems are, like why people are feeling so fearful. Let me tell you a little bit about how I am addressing this in sessions. And this is also not just my ideas, but I also reached out to some other therapists to see just what they're doing with political anxiety, because political anxiety is a little different. Like I said, it comes at certain points in our calendar. It is wrapped up in some different experiences and beliefs. And so I wanted some ideas to deal specifically with political or election related anxiety. So let me tell you what other therapists and I kind of came up with as how we're going to work with this. And first of all, you're not going to be surprised with this if you've ever been to therapy. You know, one of the main things we do is to validate. The first thing that we do is to say, you are not crazy for feeling the way you feel, given what you have experienced. And so that may be surprising to some people who haven't been to therapy before, that I would say you are not crazy, because a lot of people fear that they will go to therapy and that means that they're crazy. But what I want to just remind you that when you're validating somebody, you're saying, you're not taking on their emotions. You're not saying your emotions are the same as mine, But what you are saying is your emotions make sense, or your experience of this right now makes sense given what you've lived through in the past, or given what you've seen and experienced. So first thing is just validation. The second little bit of advice, I like this turn of phrase, and it's attributed to a different therapist, but she said, well, a lot of people actually said, don't watch so much news. Don't read so much news, because we have such a deluge of information coming at us all the time now that we're in this kind of digital age, that we don't have the ability just to turn it off and to step away unless we're very intentional about it. And so I have also struggled this year with wanting to feel informed, but the more informed that I am, the more anxious I start to feel. And so this phrase will help you, that you want to be informed, but not inflamed. So there's like a magic amount, and it's going to be different for every person based on your sensitivities. There's an amount of content that you can consume that helps you feel informed. It can go overboard to make you feel inflamed. And so if you've gotten to the point that you are starting to feel inflamed, then you need to take a step back, and that means you're consuming too much media. One of the good suggestions that I got from other therapists is to use a service such as the Pour Over, which is just like a daily news service that you can use. There's many others. The Pour Over has a Christian perspective, but there's many others that are just a service that will take all of the headlines, condense them down so that you can skim them, that you can get the main points of things, but that you're not getting all caught up in all the weeds of everything that's going on. And then you can decide for yourself which things you want to get more invested in. And this is important for us as Christians, because we know that we have a calling and a kingdom purpose, but we're not called to do all of the things for all of the people. And so paying attention to which of these articles or which of these headlines really sparks that kind of God-given purpose in me, because I will pay attention and direct my energy to those. I'm not going to be able to help everybody. Okay, so next thing is just understanding this idea of the circle of control. And if I was sitting with you and we had a whiteboard or a piece of paper, I would draw for you these two concentric circles. Inside the smaller circle, these are the things that you can control. Outside of the circle are the things that you can't control. And knowing the difference between those things is really important. It does help, actually, if you get out a notebook and you write down the things, like make these two circles. It's going to look like a target, or I guess a big donut. So inside the donut hole, you're going to write what are the things you can control. And those are my responses, how much media I consume, who I talk to, how I do my job, things like that. Things I can't control, what other people do with their information, how other people vote, how other people use their guns, or who they marry, or where they send their kids to school, or who they believe and worship. So those are things that are outside control. Now, the important thing about this when it comes to a political season is that we all have to understand that we do have influence. So we talked a little bit ago about how sometimes it feels like our vote doesn't matter very much. And that may be true as far as like the entire country, but your vote might really matter a lot when it comes to something smaller like a city council or a school board, or even just your PTA. Like, there are ways that you can be involved and make differences in your local community that are going to have a much greater impact on you and the people close to you than some of these larger issues that you don't feel like you can control. So think about ways that you can be involved that work with your own temperament and your own resources and the things that you care about. Next, I just wanted to talk about how we have to manage our thoughts. I've talked a lot on this podcast about cognitive behavioral therapy, which teaches you to figure out what are your automatic negative thoughts and then to replace them with thoughts that are more helpful, beneficial, positive. And sometimes when we do that, it can feel like, well, that's not even real and I don't even believe it. And I understand that. But I still want you to work on managing your thoughts. So first thing, take out that notebook again. I want you to write down all the fearful things or anxious things or angry things that you are thinking about the election right now. And then I want you to practice finding cognitive distortions. Now you can Google this pretty easily. Cognitive distortion, another word for that is just a thinking error. So we all make errors in our thinking. Some of the most common thinking errors are having like an all or nothing kind of black or white thinking, no gray area, no just a little bit kind of area. Another one would be like jumping to conclusions or having a negative bias or a negative filter, discounting positive things, or trying to predict the future or fortune telling. So once you can identify in your fears what's happening, like, for example, I fear if this person gets elected, there will be too many immigrants in my community. Okay, that is a legitimate fear, but let's think about what's happening there. That may be predicting the future. If this happens, then that definitely will happen. And if that happens, it'll be a disaster. That goes into catastrophizing, and I won't be able to handle it. So you have to take out what's happening in your thoughts, draw it out, and see where you're going. If you need help with this, lots of good therapists in your community that can help you learn how to do this. And then we replace those thoughts with positive thoughts. One of the positive thoughts that I've been working with is, okay, I've been through at least 10 election cycles in my lifetime, and I'm still here. I still have a roof over my head. I still have the food on my table that I need. My kids are healthy and happy. I'm still worshiping Jesus and nobody has taken that right away from me. Okay, so let's put things in perspective. This isn't going to be the disaster that I think it's going to be, although some things could change in our lives. Okay, this brings me a little bit, something kind of similar. It's something we've talked about with EMDR. We use what we call negative and positive cognitions, which are those deeply held beliefs. They're self-referential, meaning it's a belief that you have about yourself. Like in this situation, it might be something like, I won't have a voice, or I won't be able to handle it, or I won't be in control. Some of those things might be related to those negative cognitions. And what do we do with them? We trust in Romans 12:2 that says we are transformed by the renewing of our minds. And so either with the help of a therapist or your small group or just in your own journaling, you work on putting truth in the place of these negative cognitions. I'm just going through some of the clinical counseling techniques that might be used for this. So if this is helpful for you, I'm happy that you're able to use it. And if you think there's a therapist in your world that might need these skills too, you can pass this episode along to them. Another thing that I am interested in doing is finding out what my opponents are worried about. Now, I don't really feel like I have opponents, but some people who feel very strongly about politics will feel like there's our side and there's the other side. And so I can see, like, just from being in the therapist community, which tends to be a little bit more liberal and progressive, there are concerns about racism and reconciliation and transgender rights and marriage rights, things like that. So a lot of people in this community are fearful that if a certain person gets elected, that some of their rights will be taken away. Then on the other hand, I also live in a very conservative community, and a lot of people around me are fearful that if the other person gets elected, then they will lose some of their ability to be able to pay for their living expenses, or that the crime will rise in our communities because we're close to the border. So there's some real fears that people have, and I'm trying to be super vague with this, but I would encourage you, if you're very stuck and you're having the attitude of, I can't believe that a Christian person would vote for that guy or that girl. If you're having that thought, then I would encourage you to find out from somebody who believes the other way than you do what they are scared about in this election, because that hopefully for you will develop empathy and compassion, and you may still come to the same conclusion about the person or policies that you want to vote for, but then you will actually be understanding your neighbor, and you will just hopefully be a little bit more accepting and have a little bit less anxiety about it. I wanted to tell you a little bit about dialectics, which means the ability to hold two different things in your hands at one time. Well, I say hands because I always use this metaphor. Or when I'm with clients, I will show them my two hands and I'll say, it is 100% possible for us to be afraid of what might happen, and also to be trusting that God is in control. That's just the nature of being human. But if we take it down to some of the little things, like, for example, it's 100% possible for me to think that our country thrives with healthy immigration, and also there should be control of our borders. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes those things feel like they are more divisive than they really are. So some of them are more than that example that I just gave, but it's okay for, like, let's take the abortion issue, for example. I can 100% believe that people should not kill unborn babies. And also, I 100% believe that we should offer more support to mothers who are struggling. See, it doesn't have to be the one or the other thing that our politicians tend to make us think it's like you have to be one way or the other. Radical acceptance is another clinical term that we use when you have to accept something that it feels radical to have to do. So I can accept that this thing is happening and I'm going to be okay, and I don't like it, and I can still accept it. So I'm just kind of throwing out a lot of these terms. I want you to, if you're in therapy and this seems like something that might be useful, you can bring that up with your therapist. Or if you want to do a little bit more research online, there's so much good stuff available on the internet about these concepts. So just a couple other tips. Don't forget that you still need to do self-care. Like, if you are staying up late, reading all of these things and not getting the sleep you need, of course you're going to be anxious. So I just want to remind you, those 5 pillars: make sure that you are getting good exercise, that you are sleeping enough, more than you think you need, that you are eating healthy food and drinking water, that you are spending some time with God, and then finally, just that you have some safe friendships where you can express what you're thinking about and what you're wrestling with, and that they're safe for you to talk about. And if you need to add your therapist into that category, then hopefully your therapist is also struggling or wrestling through these things. I don't want them to be struggling, but wrestling with the issues so that they can figure out, how do I stay present in a session with somebody who's struggling with this kind of political anxiety while I have my own. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, of course, the spiritual response. So what we've done so far is the kind of clinical response and how we can deal with it in a clinical way. Spiritual response is always going to be a part of this podcast, that they fit together. That's why we call this integration. You may have seen t-shirts in the last few years, people using this phrase of faith over fear. And so I want to remind you that we are not fearful people. We don't need to be consumed. Our job is to trust God, to seek him out, and he actually promises that he's going to provide the peace for us. So a couple of references there, the 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Sometimes that is translated as a sound mind. And so we know that we can discern things during this election time because of the sound mind and the self-discipline, and also that we don't need to be fearful of what might happen. Another verse related to this, Isaiah 41:10, it says, "Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand." So we can remember that God is always with us, even if the person that we didn't want becomes the president, or the policies that we didn't think we could handle become the law. We get to remember that we don't need to be afraid or discouraged. Another thing for Christians to consider is just that we have a witness to others. So how we respond to the political anxiety is part of our testimony. So if we are fearful and angry and shouting at people who believe differently from us, using profane symbols of our political angst, then we are not having a good witness. So as we approach this in a calm, confident, hopeful way with compassion and empathy, this is going to be able to inspire other people and to let them know it's going to be okay. One thing that you should consider as a Christian is that when we have a lot of fear, it clouds our judgment, and then we have reactive decisions instead of well thought out decisions. And so if you are planning your vote based on a fearful reaction, then that's kind of shut down. I don't know if you remember in previous episodes, we've talked about how when we're operating in fight or flight, we lose our ability to do critical thinking and problem solving. It's just a biological response that has to do with how our body directs blood flow to our brain. So when you resist fear, you're going to be able to think more clearly. Use your Bible, use your conversations with people of different backgrounds and beliefs, and come up with some responses that prioritize your values. And your values have to do with the way of Jesus, which is the fruit of the Spirit, and love and joy and peace and patience and gentleness, and also justice and mercy. So the next thing is about the unity in the church. We have a duty as Christians not just to fight for the things that we think should be laws, but also to protect the unity of the church. So we're not creating division, but we are looking for unity. So when we have an environment of understanding and grace, we promote unity, and then we can actually talk through things. Again, I just want to remind you that we have a longer term perspective than anybody else, really, because we know that whenever the time is that Jesus comes back, that's how long we have, and that could be years and years and years from now, and that he's ultimately going to be the king. It could happen tomorrow, and then we wouldn't have to deal with this. But we know that God is sovereign, and that whatever happens for these next 4 years is all going to be a part of his plan for like the entire arc of history, not just what we're dealing with in this moment. When we resist fear, we have more peaceful interactions, and we don't want to be a people of hostility, but we want to have a spirit of reconciliation. So these are some considerations for why we need to act like Christians during election season. And by act like Christians, I don't mean fighting to get our way, even though it would be nice to see like Christian morality in our politics. The way to get there is not by anger and fear and division. It is through those fruits of the Spirit that I mentioned earlier, by having that winsome attitude of being able to talk intelligently and calmly about the things, but to really understand why people have the fears that they have, and to show them empathy and compassion. I know this is something for us therapists that we're trained in, but it is one of those things that I think just falls within the purview of the Christian life. And so if you're struggling with being able to give grace to other people, I hope that some of the ideas that I shared today could help inspire you to learn about them. The more that you understand, the more that you're going to have compassion for those people. I think in just about any circumstance, if you have a friend that is dealing with one of these issues, whether that is gay rights or abortion rights or immigration, some of these hot button issues in our country, you may have a philosophical stance that says, this is not right and I don't believe in this. But the moment you know a person that has struggled with one of those things, it softens you and it gives you a larger perspective. And that's inconvenient because you have to take that to God and you have to talk to Him about it. It's not something that you get to just shut out. You have to talk to God and see about what does He really think about this issue and what is He impressing on your heart to do about it. This is a very individual activity as well as a community activity. And so I hope that you are getting inspired to talk to God, talk to your therapist about your own political anxiety, that you would be able to be a light and show grace during these next few weeks until the election here in the U.S. And hopefully this podcast episode lasts longer than just these few weeks, but that it's something that you can refer to later as things continue to change in our culture. So with that, I would love to engage with you. If you find me on Instagram, I always post the episodes the day that they come out, and I would love to see your comments there. If you listen to it and you have questions, or you want to disagree with me on something, or just share how this episode has encouraged you. So look for me there at Soul Grit Resources. And I'd also encourage you, if there's something that you're dealing with and you'd like to get a therapist perspective on it, you can send me an email at info@soulgritresources.com. And if it's something that I'm seeing as something I could help with, or a theme that I'm seeing other people struggle with too, I'd be happy to make that into an episode for you. So thank you. Share the episode, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.